Hey everybody, welcome to What Am Games Hobbycast. I'm Mike.
I'm Kurt.
And I'm Jane.
So this week we thought we'd just kind of talk about some of our old pastimes of board games or tabletop hobbying games, but more so in our experiences of nostalgia. We're going to be talking about some of our favorite board games that we've played in our life today, and I'm actually going to go first.
Ooh.
I have several, but the first one that I need to bring up is Risk, and that's because it's such a staple of my childhood with Jane and our other buddy Ian, and also other groups of friends. Just Risk. It's a game that will test your friendship, that's for sure. But it's a very fun experience to have, and it's one of the older staples of board games. So that's my first one that I'm throwing out. But for more contemporary, I'm a huge fan of Betrayal. Any of the Betrayals, really. I personally have only played House on the Hill, but I hear the other Betrayals are also really good. I have a lot of experience with Betrayal on the House on the Hill, and I haven't even scratched the surface really of all the potential outcomes that game provides. And I just find it so fascinating that you can start a whole adventure in this cooperative manner, and then all of a sudden the tides turn, and one of you don't know who, but one of you is going to be the villain. And that's just an amazing kind of turn of events, and it's a game that turns itself on its head. And I don't know, have you guys played that one?
I've played Betrayal.
Yeah, I just think that mechanic is genius. It's so fun. I love how many... I've only actually played it through all the way once, but I love the potential for all those different outcomes. Yeah, I love how the game really completely changes once you unleash the haunt. I haven't also not played... It's a Baldur's Gate, right? The D&D variant.
Yeah, that's the main... what do you want to call that? Like clone game or copy game? Yeah.
Well, it's not really a clone, because, I mean, it's the same company, right? But, yeah, I mean, it's...
Well, yeah,
it's
but I mean, when
yeah.
I say clone, I'm talking like, for example, there's a game called Love Letter, but the mechanics of Love Letter have been turned into, 10 other games that use the same mechanic, but in, a different setting or different... So you have, Love Letter, and then you have, Thanos, who has the Infinity Gauntlet, and then you know what I mean? It's
Okay, gotcha, yeah.
It's clones.
I think
it's
another
like Monopolies.
Yeah, I was going to say another app metaphor would be either all the Monopoly is variant, I think is the
Variant.
proper term. So it's a variant all those Munchkin variants, you know.
Yes. Jelly,
there you go.
powdered, cinnamon, pumpkin around the holidays.
Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, now
Also not a sponsor of this podcast.
Though Dunkin', if you want to sponsor us, I'm all in for some free breakfast Sammys and coffee.
Yeah, we love coffee, donuts, and breakfast sandos here.
Yeah. I'm down for all this.
So, Kurt, what are some of your favorite board games?
Well, I didn't expect you to go so far back, to actually go into childhood. So I was thinking of more contemporary stuff. But since you mentioned childhood, I'm going to just mention a few I played as a kid that are big, and then I'll talk about the ones I actually wanted to talk about. So as a kid, I mean, yeah, Risk, obviously, all the standard games, but Risk was big. I was also a Hero Quest and a Talisman player, in my early teens, and before that even. I got into Hero Quest, I think I was 11 or 12 and maybe 10, and I got into Talisman when I was 14, 15.
Hero Quest, not to be confused with Hero Clicks.
Yes, not to be confused with Clicks in any way, shape, or form. But the more modern games that I really enjoy, because I used to like really big, really intricate 5-hour board games. I used to play a lot of Avalon Hill games like Merchant of Venus and what was it, Cosmic Encounter? No, that's the dice game. There's a Cosmic Overlords or Cosmic. It's a 3-hour game. It takes an hour to set up and 2 hours to play. And one of my favorites was Arkham Horror, which is also a 2-hour setup and 4 to 8 hours of playing. You can play a whole day of one game if you have all the expansions. But we're all getting older, and what I like are the more simplified, streamlined either card variants of games or deck building games. So the two games that I actually want to finally talk about are Elder Sign and Dominion for two different reasons. And Elder Sign specifically is because I love Arkham Horror, but again, could take you hours just to set up the board and hours to play through just to lose. And Elder Sign streamlines all of the fun and all of the elements of Arkham Horror into just a bunch of cards and some dice on the table. The way the game works is the main set is you're just in a museum in Arkham, Massachusetts, and weird stuff is happening in the various rooms. And the rooms are represented by 6 cards. You flip over 6 cards, and it'll be like the conservatory or like, Book Archive 1, the gardens. Like each card is a different area of the museum, and you're investigators who are exploring it, and you're like collecting clues, and you have to try to defeat the card, what's happening in that room. And then you collect the rooms, and you flip over new rooms. And that game is just a lot of fun, and you can get a whole game done in like 40 minutes to an hour. And I like that. I like that a lot. It's a great setting. The characters in that card game, the investigators, are the same characters and investigators that are in the Arkham Horror game. And I think there's an Eldritch Horror simplified board game. There's like 3 levels of difficulty. Level 3 is Arkham Horror, level 2 is Eldritch Horror, and level 1 is Elder Sign, which is the card game. And another cool thing about that is they wrote a bunch of novels that take place in the storyline of the museum being invaded by creatures from the Cthulhu mythos. And then the expansion sets take you outside of the museum. There's an expansion for the streets outside. There's an expansion for the other end of town. There's another expansion for opening portals to Lovecraftian cities. It's a great game. I love it. Absolutely. And then the other game that I really, really love, and we will never play again, the people I play with, is a game called Dominion. And I miss it terribly because it's one of those deck building games where at the beginning of the game you select a bunch of cards. You basically, during the course of the game, you build your deck and you play your deck at the same time. So you're gathering materials so that you could buy more cards and then build up your deck. And the cards in your deck then have rules. So like you'll play a card that says, draw 3 and gain a new card for your deck, or like spend money and buy victory points. It's hard to explain. It's really hard to explain. But you're building your deck while you're going.
Is Dominion the one where it's like there's like 4 space factions or something like that in your deck building?
No, it's not space factions. It's usually it's kind of like medieval or Renaissance. It's
because
like
the one I played,
there's other versions. Other versions. Like there's expansions.
I think I played the space version of it.
Okay, but it's like there's like 12 decks set up, and you're drawing cards and you're building your deck, but then you're playing 3. It's really hard to explain, but it's really, really cool because you're basically coming up with strategy and you're trying to draft cards and build your deck, and other people are trying to buy and draft cards themselves. So you have to think like, okay, am I going to spend my resources to stop someone else from getting their hand on the cards that will give them victory, or am I going to try to build my deck so that it works the best? And the reason we stopped playing it is because we played with a bunch of guys who were like, instead of playing the game just to have a good time, they played the game to like, I must win and defeat everyone, and I'm making this into a system now. And so I'm sorry, I won't play the game unless we have these 3 cards involved, because otherwise the game takes too long and I can't win. Okay, so that's why we stopped playing that game. But I like deck building games. They just the mechanics are a lot of fun. That's something we should have talked about actually, is like the styles of board games we like, because I like resource management and deck building type games and exploration type games where it's not PvP. I must say I don't enjoy PvP anymore, just mostly because some of my friends are not good at handling it. But
yeah, I've never been a huge fan of like the super competitive board games. It was just surprising why I liked Risk so much as a kid, because it's super competitive. Risk is always super competitive. But I really like the fact that there are games out there now, like the Arkham Horror card game. I believe you can play as one person.
Oh, Elder Sign is one person? I think so. There's an online version of it that you could play on like your iPad or phone.
Yeah, and then I recently picked up the new Bloodborne game that has some cool miniatures that I'm going to paint eventually. And I'm excited to paint them because they look really cool, and I'm a huge fan of that universe. I also really like the idea that it gives you the option to play a narrative campaign solo if you want to. You can kind of just sit down and set all that stuff up. So I like cooperative games for the most part, like you, Kurt. And I also like board games that offer you the ability to play by yourself so that you can at least learn the rules. And then when you go and play with your friends, you can teach them the rules better, and you're not spending like 80 hours just standing there trying to figure it out. But now that we've kind of talked about ours, let's hear about Jane's favorites.
Well, Mike, I'm really glad that you brought up Risk because, I also have a lot of fond memories of playing that with you. I wanted to bring up a variant of Risk that they've published, which is Risk, I believe 2210 AD is the year on it.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think it took a lot of what I like about Risk and emphasized the good parts and took away some of the bad parts. The first thing that's really great about it is there is a 5-turn limit, because, when you get to the end game of Risk, you can just have these turns where, one player is like almost taking over the entire world and leaves like 2 countries there, and then the other player does the same thing, and you just kind of go back and forth like that for a while in a bit of a stalemate. So, this version of Risk totally eliminates that. And then they also have, various ability cards, various commanders that give you boosts. You can colonize the moon if you want. It's just, that's my personal favorite flavor of Risk.
I like how they opened up the board in that version of Risk as well, so that you don't have like the tunneling in the turtling, I should say, in Australia, or like
I love that.
You can actually get to places. Yeah,
you can get to Australia from more than just
Asia.
New
Zealand.
Yeah.
There's a 40K version of Risk too.
Oh yeah, I haven't looked at that,
that
but
up.
I mean, I'm sure that would be fun. Us and our 40K. So one of the games that I wanted to talk about, I don't even know how objectively good it is because I haven't played it since I was a kid, but I have really fond memories of it. And Mike, I'm not sure if we ever played this together or tried, but it's called Key to the Kingdom. And from what I remember, because again, I haven't played this for well over 20 years, it's an adventuring board game, and it's kind of like D&D Light in some ways. I mean, the object is to you have to find the keys and get back to the center of the board before like a certain amount of time runs out. And this game just kind of really opened my eyes at a young age to what a board game could be. They had a fun mechanic where you started with the board kind of folded up on itself, and if you got to a certain space, you could open up the board and it would reveal an entirely different, set of locations, and you had to explore all of them to see if, the keys that you were looking for were in a certain castle. And my brother had like played it once at a friend's house, and eventually we tracked down a copy. I think in the early days of eBay, we tracked down a secondhand copy, and it was missing at least one card. So like we made a proxy, and we still just had a blast playing it. And I just loved the idea that a board game could, like, that the board itself could transform was super cool to me. And also just that we were so excited about this game that we went through the trouble to hunt it down, and also to, make our own versions of the pieces that were missing is just it's a really special memory to me. And I think that's a big reason, like that kind of feeling is a big reason why I like playing board games today.
I love that story.
Thanks. Yeah, it's probably still in my mom's basement. I bet we could dig it out and give it a shot.
I was gonna say, I don't think we ever actually ended up playing that one together. I don't think that was one.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
I don't know.
It is on the complicated side, and again, like I don't know if it's actually any good, or if it's just one of those childhood things that became mythologized. And as I get older, I'm like you guys. I prefer games that are less directly competitive. I enjoy a good cooperative game. I also recently I've become aware of games that are kind of indirectly competitive, where there's not as much. You're not gonna steal your opponent's resources necessarily, or like make moves to check them, but you are gonna you are like in competition, like you're trying to get the most points at the end, but you're not like directly trying to tear your opponents down. So I've played 2 games recently that I've really enjoyed like that. One is called Patchwork, which is a board game for just 2 people, and my wife and I were on a little Airbnb getaway, because that's the thing we've been doing since COVID, to just like change the scenery, since she's working from home and I'm unemployed. So we don't go crazy, we'll just like go to some town, and we were actually in New Haven, Connecticut. They have a really great game shop down there. I believe it's called Elm City Games. But we went in and we asked the guy, hey, what are good games that you would recommend for 2 players? So he pulls this one off the shelf, and basically you are trying to fill in your board with quilt pieces, and you are competing. You're pulling pieces from the same pool, and at the end of the game, you get points for how many squares you've filled up on your quilt, essentially. And it's really chill and meditative, and even though there is a winner and a loser, you're really mostly just competing against yourself, and you tally your points against your opponent at the end. So that's really nice. And then last night, I played a board game via tabletop sim with my brother called The Quacks of Quedlinburg, which has kind of a similar mechanic. In this game, you are taking on the role of an alchemist in a, Renaissance era city market, and you are brewing potions. And you start the game with a certain number of tokens, and you draw them blind out of a bag. And as you place your tokens in your pot, you get certain points for what you play. But if you get too many of a certain number of a certain kind of token, then your pot explodes and your scoring for that round is vastly reduced. So it actually does have kind of a deck building mechanic, because you have the opportunity to buy additional tokens, which will give you, various abilities and bonuses, and more importantly, kind of water down your token pool, so you have less of a chance of drawing the bad ones. And it's a similar kind of vibe in which, yes, you have to keep an eye on your opponents, because, as you are adding ingredients to your cauldron, you have to be careful and weigh your risk. It's like, okay, so what's my probability of drawing a bad token at this point? How many more spaces do I need to get ahead to win the round? Is it worth risking blowing up? So I had a great time with that last night. I might try and track down a hard copy, because it was just that good. Those are a couple of games I've really enjoyed lately.
I'll have to try and play that with you. Now we already kind of covered some games we miss in that.
I still got some stuff though.
Yeah, me too. So I'm just gonna, a game that I miss playing. I know it's still around, but it's one that haven't played in a long time. Probably won't really ever play again, but still have fond memories of it, is the Lord of the Rings tabletop game. And I really like that miniature game. It was just a lot of fun. Even if I always got slaughtered, it's a lot of fun to go back and replay some of those battles from the books and the movies. And you just enjoy recreating that sense of epic scale that universe provides. You got all these Urukai fighting this tiny band of elves and dwarves and whatnot, and they're just, I don't know, it was pretty epic, and it was a lot of fun. And I've seen some of the new minis that they released for it, and they look amazing. Again, probably never going to get back to it, but it is a game that I do miss.
Yeah, I also have very fond memories of that. I've definitely considered picking up some of the minis just to paint them for old time's sake, because, like so many of GW's sculpts, they've improved vastly in the, 15 years or so I spent away from the hobby.
Yeah, GW's definitely good about dragging you in, because I want to paint everything they're putting out right now, and it's I don't need any of this stuff. I have so many minis, so it's been tough. Especially working at a store with a discount. It's I could just get this for half price. No, stop.
After all, why shouldn't I keep it? It came to me.
It's mine, my precious. No, it's really bad.
Sorry. It's okay, you did your best.
My precious. So juicy sweet.
Hey, that's not bad.
Wish to catch a fish, so juicy sweet.
I'm trying to come up with other games that I miss.
Well, like I said, I have a story for that.
Yeah, go ahead, Grant. Let's hear your missing
something.
So the games I miss thing is actually probably going to turn into I'm not going to let it turn into a rant, but it might be old guy yelling at the sky and kids on my lawn type of thing. So I'm going to try to control myself. So it's not so much the game, because I'll clarify, but it's not so much the game as it's the way I play and my friends play. So, obviously I've been playing D&D forever. It's one of my mainstays, but I have played a lot of other RPG games. I've run other systems. I've played in other systems. And I don't want to get into the big fight that I see all the time on Twitter and in the forums and all the places. I don't actually hang out with the role-playing community too much, because you get a lot of people who basically hate D&D and think, if you like D&D, there's something wrong with you. And so they try to push really hard for you to play other things. Oh, you should be playing these other games because they're superior, or, there's a lot of that mentality, which I don't like. But the thing is that I will admit that there are other games I want to play that aren't D&D. And it's because they play in a different style. Now, I'm not one of these people who goes in, oh, D&D is just dungeon crawls and kill everything and colonize, all the negativity that people like to put on the game, which I do not agree with and I do not side with. I believe that you could do just about any style of game and any type of game using D&D. You just have to understand how to customize the rules and how to go with the flow and realize that the number one rule of role-playing is just to have fun and do what you want to do. You don't have to actually follow every single rule as written. Though some of the people I play with do believe you have to do every rule as written. So that's a long, convoluted way to get around to the point, which is I want to play some other games and I want to run some other games because I remember when the people I role-played with played their characters differently. In talking with you guys are having a fun time. You talk about a lot of funny joke characters, and I like that, but most of the games I'm in are very serious, and like when I'm in a mood to joke, no one else is in a mood to joke, or sometimes I'm the guy who's super serious. I create a lot of super serious characters, and that's just what I'm creating because that's what I want to play. Like, for example, I'm in a Curse of Strahd game, and I'm a bard and there's another bard, and everyone knows what the going joke about bards is. The going joke about bards is, that they're like sex machines and they seduce all the monsters. Well, the other guy is playing the sex machine who wants to seduce and sleep with every monster. I'm playing the guy who just buried his family and is a storyteller who wants to be like Van Helsing and hunt Dracula, okay? But I'm a bard and he's a bard, and they're very different characters. So finally getting back to the point, I want to switch up and play a game that's not D&D, not because I can't play it in D&D, but because I think the players in the game will say, hey, this isn't D&D, so I could play differently. So I want to play Call of Cthulhu again. I have run Call of Cthulhu before. I've run 3rd edition, 5th edition, 6th edition. The new rules for 7th edition are amazing. I spent most of the pandemic working on 2 different games, and we're not going to talk about the first one. We'll talk about the second one. The second one is a Call of Cthulhu campaign, which I've been working on for 3.5, 4 months now. Basically since January, I've been writing this massive sandbox open world Call of Cthulhu game, and I've been writing articles about it and putting it on my website. So a little plug there. But the reason why I want to switch over to Cthulhu is because when I was a kid and I first started running D&D, I had only played D&D twice. My uncle ran me through a dungeon, and then a couple weeks later when it was raiding, he ran me through, like a 5 or 6 hour session where I got out of that dungeon, went to a city and met a bunch of characters and just wandered. It was just me and my uncle telling a story to each other. It was great. And then after that, he gave me his books and said, okay, you go run games now. And I'm like, run games? I've only played 2. But the thing was I didn't know any other way to run a game other than to basically make up stories on the spot. I didn't spend a lot of time writing stories. I just improv'd. I was a super improv guy. But we used to do a lot of minutia. Now, we're all older now, and we've all been playing for 20 years, so most of my players are like, okay, I know exactly what my character's going to do. I got all my dice set up. I know all my attacks. It's mechanical. Like D&D is very much mechanical, especially playing online with Roll20. It's less talking and less getting into character, or less doing the jokes and doing the voices. It's more, okay, I move my figure on the map, we talk for a little while, I do some fighting, we talk for a little while, we do more fighting. Okay, we've played for 3 hours, it's like 11 o'clock at night, we all have work, good night. But I miss when I would run a game and would spend like maybe an hour like role playing, having dinner, with a bunch of people and talking to NPCs and going back and forth. So that's why I wanted to go back to trying to run Call of Cthulhu, because Call of Cthulhu is mostly about normal people investigating abnormal things, and you kind of have to think your way through things and talk your way through things, and you only fight occasionally. So games I miss just sort of being more immersed in role playing. And I don't want to say I can't do that with everyone I play with currently, but I kind of feel I can't do that with everyone I play with right now, which makes me sad, which is why I've tried to work on games that were not D&D, so that when players come to the game, they're like, oh, I've never played this game, how do you play? I could sort of teach them to go back to how we used to play when we were 12 years old sitting in the basement, versus how we play now that most of us are late 30s, early 40s, or you guys are younger. But you know what I mean? Like, I hope I'm making sense. I don't know. I feel like I'm babbling a little bit here. Did that come together? Did I make...
Yeah. Absolutely.
I have a few things that I kind of wanted to talk about with that, though. One, it sounds like it could just simply be the issue of, who's DMing and who's playing. So sometimes you need to swap DMs or GMs to kind of spice things up so that you're playing under another type of game, another vision. When your DM is the same DM every time, or most of the time, you're going to run into a thing where all the players already know how that DM likes to handle all of their combat encounters, how they like to write out their talkie points, all of that stuff. Like you already figured it out. It's been 20 years. We know, right? Like I'm just going from your angle there. The other thing that just kind of like miffed me a little was when you're like players who insist on the rules being played as written. Well, that's fine and dandy, except the first rule of D&D is that the dungeon master is always right. And therefore, the rules are guidelines. That is what that means, that they are there to help inform you of a path to take, but are not necessarily set in stone. That if the DM needs to change things to meet a meta or a guy or a story or whatever, that's the whole point. So that's very irritating that there are players who think that way about D&D because they're forgetting the golden rule of D&D.
I have a worse one for you, Mike. Let me clarify this a little bit. So I'm talking from a player perspective because I actually did not run games for almost 10 years for a specific reason. So you're talking about a player who's like, no, it's raw. Okay, so the player who in my group is the most often the one who say, no, this is raw, this is how the rules are written, is the main DM of my Tuesday game. So as a DM, he is also like, no, this is the raw rules and I am going to enforce the raw rules. And then when he becomes a player, he makes life hell for any DM who is running him as a player because he will basically just like
min-max it.
He'll min-max his character and he will also like, what do you mean my spell doesn't get through? I'm like, well, it's a story point. You can't get through this thing because you got to go find the freaking magic key. No, he doesn't want to hear that because there's no rule. Like raw rules say that the spell he just used dispelled this, so now the trap is gone and you can't tell him otherwise.
My book over there on the shelf, I really just want to get over there and open up my 5th edition book that literally says on the first few pages, the DM is always right.
Yep.
Those are written rules. That is the written rule to follow of Dungeons and Dragons.
And what he'll do is...
Because I've played with people who you're talking about. I've played with people like that. It's not fun because it's not D&D.
Yep, exactly. And then the worst thing that happens is that, in the past, I was, I've had moments where I was a prick saying, hey, no, man, the rules go this way. But, that might be 10 years ago. That might be 15 years ago. And anytime I sit there and say, dude, just relax and back off, he will pull up something from 15 or 20 years ago and be like, nope, you did it to me 15 years ago. And like, he won't say 15. He'll say, you did this to me during this campaign. And I'll be like doing the math going, dude, that was like 15 years ago. And I'm like, I'm not like that anymore, but you're still you. So so my whole story basically comes down to, I want to run this Call of Cthulhu game because it will be more investigation and more minutia and talking and like role playing, like a lot more acting and role playing. But so far I've taken months and months and months to work on this game because the only way I could run this game is if I hand select who my players are. And I feel bad because there are players who I play with right now who I don't want to invite to this game if I run it, but I don't want to be the person who wouldn't invite a friend to play this game. So it's like I'm spending all this time like making maps, researching 1940s like architecture and Boston and New England.
Maybe you should DM for a new group of people with that then. I would say
that's
kind of
where I'm heading right now. But it's one of those things where I feel really bad about it. And as it is right now, I have 2 people who have told me like, hey, we'll play in this Call of Cthulhu game and not give you flack. The person who I'm talking about being problematic is already said, oh, we're not good at that. We're not good at investigation because he doesn't want to play an investigation game. Everyone here is too stupid to get clues. And I'm like,
man,
and he's not actually saying the words everyone's too stupid. He's like, oh no, we're all very bad at it. I'm never good at finding clues. No one's good at it. And so that's how
I'm
he's
not
basically
good at it, therefore no one is.
I mean, if I can kind of encapsulate what I feel like you've been saying, Kurt, is like there are kind of two people you find when you're playing D&D. There are the people who are playing to win, and there are the people who are playing to play, like in like the childhood sense of the word. And I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a right and a wrong way to play D&D, but for my money, if you're a play to win kind of guy or person, in my experience, the play to win kind of people tend to be guys.
Yeah, this is a guy.
Yeah, but if you're a play to win kind of person, for my money, you can get that same experience much more easily by booting up a console.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah,
I don't
a competitive
see,
video game or something.
Yeah, I don't see any
yeah.
reason to be playing D&D in that context. Because for me, like, in my origin story that I shared, a couple podcasts back, the thing that blew my mind about D&D was the possibilities. And if you're gonna play straight on the rails, you might be better served playing something else.
Rails would be the wrong analogy, because he definitely believes in freedom and he definitely rolls with what players do. Like I said, like as a DM, I enjoy 80 to 90% of what he dishes out. I mean, sometimes he repeats himself because, I mean, we've been playing this game for a very long time. But I will say that I retired as a DM over a decade ago because I just couldn't run games with him at my table, and I didn't want to be like, you can't come to my table. I actually, when third edition started, I actually ran a game without him and didn't tell him I was running a game. I was like, no, I'm going to stay at second edition. I'm never going to play third. But I ran a game in third edition and I had a really good time. And then it came out, he found out basically like, hey, you've been running a game for 2 years. And I'm like, oh, I got into it. I got roped into it. And he's like, you got roped into a game that has 8 people at your house every single week? And I'm like, well, it started with just 3 and then it grew. And so, we're about to start a second half of the campaign. You can come into that one. And I let him come into that one. And we played for a number of years. And it just got more and more difficult with like other players. Like, no, it's not jiving. So like I said, I love him as a DM. And we've been friends for 25, 26 years. So it's like one of those things where like, I don't want to be like the bad guy. So like I came out of retirement gaming wise. At the end of 2018, I ran a game called Torg. Torg Eternity is a new version of it. And it started off all right, but it's one of those things where like he doesn't like he understands like D&D is not about winning, but at the same time he's one of those guys who hangs out on the op boards and hangs out in the forums, and like my character's suboptimal. I should have spent my points differently because I don't know the system and I didn't know how to like buy my skills, so I hate my character. Because I hate my character, I'm going to passively aggressively make the other players miserable for the game. So like as part of the game we were switching to I really don't want to get into the long version of the story, but there's different settings all in the same game. So like this setting is like primal earth, and this setting is like fantasy, and this setting is like post-apocalyptic. So for each setting in the world, because they're different parts of the map, I had them create different characters so that when he was getting really miserable in the first setting, we then switched up to the second setting, and that game started going like really well. Like it became like they were rebuilding a city, and like it was like really in depth. The story was getting there, but we started having problems yet again. And so then we switched to the third setting. And then in the third setting, he just went like, oh, I've started mastering this. So now everything is going to be overpowered. Like I'm playing a character that can punch a tank and break it in half. Starting. So I don't know. It's just become a problem. But it's like one of those things where I don't want to be like, no, you're out. But you're right. I probably need to find a couple new players and some other people to play with. It's just, I've been playing with so many people for so long.
Yeah, dealing with problem players like that, I've known people to be min-maxers. What I want to say, and this is also kind of, something I didn't really want to have out there, but I'm willing to put it out there because I think it definitely helps this conversation along into like seeing what kind of players we actually are. There have been times in this current campaign that I am in with Jane where I have actually rolled extremely well, but because I felt other players needed to take more actions, or I felt that it was boring to just have me do whatever I was doing, I purposefully have failed several rolls. I would say to the DM, like, oh no, I whiffed that one. I don't know. When I play D&D, I think of it as we're going on an adventure as a party. We may have characters that may have individual stories that are, different. We can play a selfish character, but at the table as a player, you need to separate that from your character because you're just going to make everybody freaking miserable. And the game is about adventuring and exploring and role playing. Role playing means there's very little rules to what you're supposed to do for role playing. That's why, like, when people complained about 4th edition, they're like, all the rules are about combat. There's no rules about role playing. And it's like, because it's role playing. You do whatever you want to do with role playing. You're not, that's the whole point. The first rule is the DM is always right, which means that whatever serves their narrative is correct, meaning all the rules are fluid. They are not solid. That is encapsulated in that first golden rule. And people who forget that ruin the experience for everyone else at the table.
Absolutely. I will say the person we were talking about, like when he let go of, I mentioned in a previous podcast about 4th edition and how the dungeon master just like let go of all the restrictions. When he let go of all the restrictions and started just having fun with the game, those were the best games we ever played. Absolutely fantastic.
So yeah, Jane, I'd like to hear just like a little bit of thoughts on that, and then we're going to quickly run down our next segment. These 3 topics kind of all bleed into each other, so we've kind of covered each topic, and I'm going to put this in so that the listener can understand that, our rundowns are also fluid because I am always right as the DM of this podcast.
Oh boy.
Well, I mean, I think I'm actually going to walk back a little bit of what I just said about there being no wrong way to play. Well, no, okay. I agree there's no wrong way to play D&D, but I do think there's a right way. And I think, Mike, it's exactly what you were just saying is to keep in mind we are doing this as a party. I am a little on the fence as to, I perfectly respect your decision to, call that some of your roles aren't going to go through, is I think that's every player's right. I don't think that's something that I personally jive with. Like, I enjoy just rolling with the dice because I know that, like, I tend to have a really wide swing with my rolls. Like, I mean, most people do because it's probability.
Can I clarify that just a little? When I did fudge my rolls, it was because I had visibly noticed the other people at the table becoming bored.
Gotcha.
That's exactly
why.
I
do. I think I remember the occasion you're talking about, actually. Yeah, I mean, I think in the game that we're playing too, we have the particular difficulty of having a giant party. Because I think if we're at full, are we at 10
like
or 11
players
right now?
I think there's it's 11 players and then the DM. Then there's the mystery players that pop in and out every now and then because there's some that do that.
I ran a regular 10-person game and that was difficult.
Yeah, so I mean it's tricky. I think there are some occasions where, and also our DM, I think this is definitely the biggest game he's ever run, so there's absolutely a learning curve in terms of like keeping everyone interested.
Well, he's also an amazing DM as well. He's very knowledgeable. He is a professional dungeon master, and he knows what he's doing. He can be a little tight on some of the rules. Like, I think he needs to take it easy on Dina. but
well, I mean, I think part of just because some of our players, despite having been playing for like a year at this point, are still extremely unfamiliar with the rules. And I think there might be a bit of frustration on his part coming through with that. Like there are many occasions where I'm just like, man, we've been doing this for a year. Like, this is a pretty basic mechanic. And that's obviously not to say anything negative, like, personally about anyone in the group, because I like them all a lot. But, it does get in the way of the game sometimes. And when you do have such a large group, being able to make your actions relatively quickly is a big part of keeping the game moving. It's just, there's a lot of moving parts. But to circle back around, I do think the main thing to remember when you're playing D&D is that you are not in it alone. You are in it together. And if you are the outlier in playing in a certain way and nobody else is playing that way, then maybe you need to kind of reconsider your approach. In fact, one of the only times I ever ran a game, I found that it was not my cup of tea. I had several very new players and one more experienced player whose character I think maybe had some potential. He was playing a Dragonborn who didn't speak Common very well, so he ended up getting into a whole, and he was also a very much like take charge and hope everyone follows him kind of character. So that approach didn't really work. One of the other players, as their like parting action before they had to leave the group permanently, was to try and kill him, which I allowed as the DM because like it was in character for everybody. And it was a little mean, but we killed his character and he rolled someone else who was a much better team player. Like, I don't think that kind of thing is entirely out of the question.
I mean, the way I've always kind of viewed Dungeons and Dragons, even from the first few games that I played, I mean, I started with a very good DM as well. His name was Chris. You know, he would stick with his plan, and he was very good with narratives and world building, but he also allowed the players to be very flexible in terms of like me being a newcomer who wanted to always drop compact a piece and talk our way out of stuff versus, you know, the rogue in the party who was min-max stats and was there to just fuck everything up, you know, and he managed to keep both of us in line, you know, not straying one way or the other. It's really all about, you know, your DM. And I think a thing too to remember is that DMs need to be flexible by definition. And that includes with the rules. You know, they need to be flexible with their players. They need to be flexible with their story because things aren't going to always go as the DM planned it. That's just how it works. Your players are very unpredictable a lot of times. So I just, I'm circling back again because it really does frustrate me. I've had many conversations with those people. But no, it's okay. I mean, like, it's good because we have something to talk about, but there's that just really, that bothers me that there's, that people do that are so like, oh, the rules need to be this way for a game that is about role playing a fantasy character. Like, it's what you make it. Like, it's your character. You make it. You choose what to do.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just want to make sure I'm painting the proper picture. Like, as much as as a player, he's going to call you on the rules and he's going to try to min-max everything. As a DM, he is experimental. Like he'll make up like house rules for stuff. He'll experiment with new stuff, but at the same time, like, it's like, no, that spell doesn't work that way. Sorry, you can't like cast the spell to do a different effect.
No, but my frustration was coming from what you were saying as a player.
It's when he becomes a player that things are problematic. Like, I love him as a DM. I love his games. I mean, I've been playing in those games for a very long time. Even when I get frustrated sometimes because he's a deadly DM too. He likes to beat the crap out of us. But like, you know, that's the pay and that's the buy. And I know that I'm going to be in a game where I'm going to nearly die. I nearly died. Like my current character in his current game has nearly died 4 times, and we've only played a couple games like of the new campaign. So yeah, it is what it is. Like I said, I don't like running him, but I don't like, you know, I don't like being that guy. But yeah, if I ever get around to running this Call of Cthulhu game, it's probably going to be either with new people or with just a hand-picked crew.
Yeah, that's what I'd say. Honestly, if you're playing games, I don't know. We're all adults now. You know what I mean? Yeah. We want to play these games to have a good time, like to unwind, to break up the monotony of everyday BS. Let's have a good time. And having that kind of just straight up rules, you know, taskmaster, rules commissar, just like
there it is,
bearing down on you. Like, that's, I don't know, man, that really frustrates me. Like, especially when just hearing the fact that he backtalked the DM when the DM said, no, your spell can't work like this because that's what I said. You know, narratively, I don't want you doing this. I am allowed to tell you no. Like, that, to backtalk the DM after that is just like, that's confuddling to me.
Yeah, followed up with there's no rule where you can make a spell that does this. I don't know how you physically put together this ward, this magic ward, and this magic item that we're not supposed to have yet.
Yeah.
Like, it's impossible. There's no rules for it. How about the rule of, like, this is the narrative where you get the special item to bypass it?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like the rule to me.
Okay, so those were some games that we missed and some like ways of playing games that we wish to return to eventually. Now we're going to talk about some old rules from our favorite games that are still currently in play that we just wish to come back. Now that could be like 40k rules that were from 3rd edition or 4th edition, whatever, you know, that are no longer in the game that we want to come back. Or same with Dungeons and Dragons. It was in a previous edition, it's not here anymore. Whatever, that kind of thing. And my example of that is just, you know, the leadership tests on Death Company. I really don't understand it. Lore-wise, it doesn't make any sense. These guys are fearless at this point. They're nutso, just berserking across the field. They already can't take actions. They already can't fall back. They have to constantly press forward, but they still fall to leadership. And I just don't understand that because it doesn't make sense. But I mean, it maybe balancing, but I don't even see it as a balancing thing, considering there's a lot of other units out there like Vanguard veterans that can do a whole bunch of stuff. They still have to worry about their leadership, but they're not a special unit like that's designed for just going out to die, right? Now, if the leadership test for Death Company was like, if they explained it in a way of like, oh, well, you know, these are guys that accidentally killed themselves while trying to kill other people, that's cool. But that's not how it's described. It's still just the average leadership test, and it's kind of weird. So that's my example rule / my rule. Now I'm going to throw it to Jane. I'd like to hear yours.
Well,
if you have one.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been playing these games really long enough to have rule changes like that per se, but I will say that I just kind of, this is going to sound so silly, but I have never fully understood the relationship between your athletic stat and or your strength stat and your athletic scores in D&D. Like, I will always think that I have it correct, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, so I can jump this many feet with this much of a lead up. And it's just, no, you mathed wrong again. So, I mean, maybe the rule that I'm hoping will return is the rule where my brain is better at math.
So, can you give me a bit of an example on that? Do you have something specific, like other than the run in, jump in? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, because that rule's actually wrong. Because it's just a set number for distance and height jumps in 5th edition now.
Oh, that's what I thought. Okay.
It's,
well, so
there's...
I had an occasion where I was trying to like long jump across an island, and my character had an extreme strength stat, or I was trying to long jump across a river to an island. My character had an extreme strength stat, and I thought that I was going to be able to make that jump, but I guess the DM was going off of an old rule where I still ended up having to roll for it.
Yeah, so for long jumps, as long as you move 10 feet, you can jump like your strength number in feet. So like if you had like a strength of 20, you go 20 feet, 4 squares, and that's it. For the high jump, there's a thing where you could make a strength check to try to add a couple extra feet, plus you have your body length. So it's like a weird combination, like there's an equation for it. But the actual long jump is purely just your strength.
Well, now I know.
Yep.
It seems like I fell victim to Rule 1 of D&D, which I never want to go away.
The biggest problem that you get is you get people who have played multiple editions of D&D freaking trying to run the wrong rules. Like, I constantly keep pulling 3rd or 4th edition rules and saying that that's the current rule, and it's not.
They just bring like the PHB from 3rd edition or 4th edition to the table, and everybody's got 5th edition books.
No, it's just literally like my brain is telling me that this is the right rule, and like it's like, no, that's the previous rule, and I'm like, oh shit.
I remember a lot of arguments over like, including from myself. I don't remember the specifics of them, but I do remember getting into a lot of them with my DM and with the players around the table. Everybody had some sort of confusion when we moved from Pathfinder to 4th edition. That was a big kind of rules soup that we had trouble with.
Soup.
But Kurt, I want to hear your like old rule that you'd like to come back.
So besides the whole problem of misremembering rules and using the old ones already to begin with, we already adapted a lot of our favorite rules from previous editions into games. So like, for example, like Bloody doesn't exist anymore because all the community, the people online are a pain in the butt when it comes to D&D. And like, oh, we don't like 4th edition terms because, you know, there's just all these people who hate on 4th edition for no reason, or for like no real reason. They just perceive a problem that doesn't exist. So getting back on topic, so like we use Bloody in our current game, and we use a lot of those old rules that we like. But one of the things I really, really miss from 4th edition to 5th edition is I miss the Warlord. Like, the Warlord no longer exists as a character class or a role. I mean, the role still exists, but the mechanics for that class just aren't fully supported. Like, some classes have parts of it, but no class has all of it. And I kind of wish there was a real straight up warlord again, instead of me having to like multi-class like a ranger, fighter, bard to get the whole thing working again. Now, are either of you familiar with the class, or do I have to explain further?
I think
I'd like to hear an explanation.
I think I might. I think I might remember it, but please go on.
So, in 4th edition and in other editions of the game, but specifically in 4th edition, they defined the roles to actually be actual roles, whereas before they were just sort of like people fell into roles. So, like, you know, you have like your fighter, and you have your controller who controls the battlefield, and you have your leader, and leaders are bards and clerics. Like, they're the people who heal you and buff or debuff the enemy. So that's what a leader is. And the warlord was a fully martial warrior who was a leader. So he didn't have spells, he didn't have magic, he had tactics and brain power as a fighter. So, like, one of the things a warlord would do was, he, instead of taking his attack, he'd be like, hey, you, hit that character. So, like, let's say the three of us were playing, and I was in a really crappy spot, like I couldn't get to an enemy, but Jane was in combat with an enemy. I'd go, Jane, here's a +2 to hit that guy on my turn. So Jane would get an extra set of actions to attack that guy because I gave him those actions. That's what, like, the main thing of a warlord was. But he could also he could also do stuff like, rub some dirt on it, like, here's like 10 points of healing with no magic, because I just inspired you to get back up and get to work. You know, I just gave you like a second wind. And it was all stuff like that, where, like, okay, it's my turn. I'm going to allow both of you to move 3 squares or 15 feet. So even though you guys have both finished your turns, you get to both move without provoking attacks of opportunity and move around the enemies on the field. You know, like, so both of you can move and get to a flank, or both of you could disengage from the guys you're fighting and get away without being hurt. And that's my turn. I just moved you guys out of harm's way without having to do anything.
That's really cool.
And so, like, that still kind of exists. Like, you got bards who can heal you and give you, like, you know, bardic inspiration and give you, you know, a d6 to add to your rolls. But there's not this whole class that's 100% non-magic and has all these abilities to, like, heal, move people, come up with tactics, debuff enemies by, like, shouting at them or being, you know, it just doesn't exist anymore. It just totally went away, and all of its good stuff got taken and distributed to bards and rangers and fighters. So I would definitely like to see a 5e full warlord come back.
I wonder if they'll add it in an upcoming, like, expansion book or something. They
I don't
might,
know, man. It's been years, and it
yeah.
still doesn't really exist. It's just they give it stuff to other people.
Yeah,
like, well, other people can do it.
I know there's a fighter subclass that is, or it's one of the martial archetypes that is kind of like that, but not quite.
Well, there's the mastermind, which is I think a rogue or fighter like fighting style, where, like, basically you could pre-plan stuff and get, like, boosts to, like, your d20 rolls or get a couple of, like, extra bonuses, but that's about it.
Yeah. Oh, so I'm thinking of the Battle Master, which has some of the, like, I will use my action to give you a free action kind of things.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's the closest you can get. Yep.
Yeah, but some of the things you were describing are much more interesting.
Well, because remember, this was 4E, so you had encounter, daily, and at-will powers. So depending on what level of power you were throwing, like if you were throwing a daily, the daily would be like, okay, so you have advantage and, like, a bonus to, like, your damage. Like, here's +10 damage and advantage. You take your attack. That would be like a daily power. So, like, you know, give someone, like, a super, like, punch or hit. I missed that.
And with that said, that's our podcast for this week, guys. Thank you for listening, everybody. We enjoy your ears being here on our What Am Games podcast for hobbyists and others with ears.
Yes, ears are necessary.
Till next time, dear listeners.
Peace.
Be well.